He looked at me then, really looked, the way he used to when he was 5 and trying to read my face after breaking something in the yard. I think I broke something anyway, he said. I didn't offer comfort, not because I lacked it, but because sometimes the only way people grow is by sitting inside the very thing they fractured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. I've spoken to a lawyer, he said. I wanted to make it right. I didn't touch the paper. I already did, I said, months ago. He nodded slowly, I figured. We sat in the quiet for a while. The sun filtered through the curtains. Outside, the breeze nudged the wind chimes into a slow song. It could have been any afternoon from the last 20 years, if not for the fact that everything had changed. I didn't know how much you did for us, he said, until you stopped. That's often how it goes. I miss you. I looked down at my tea. The leaves swirled like tiny dancers at the bottom of the cup. I didn't go anywhere, I said. You did. He didn't argue. There was dignity in his silence this time. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly, I believed him. That was the strange part. I didn't need to, but I did. But belief doesn't mean return. I appreciate that, I said, but it doesn't mean we go back. He nodded. I know, I just wanted to sit with you. One more time, I poured him another cup. He didn't ask, and I didn't say anything. The gesture spoke for itself. We talked for a little while longer. Nothing heavy. He asked about the garden, about Evelyn, about the new furniture in the reading room I'd built from the back sunroom. I told him about Bella's new fascination with the solar system, how she'd asked if stars could be planted like flowers. He smiled. Before he left, he stood in the doorway for a moment. One hand on the frame. Do you think maybe someday the twins could visit? That's up to them, I said. He nodded. Once, then again. Thank you, Mum. I watched him walk down the path. He turned to glance back just once, then got in the car and drove away. The door closed with a soft click. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the house settle again around me, familiar, still mine. He had come, and that mattered, but I didn't need it. I went back out to the garden. The sun had moved, casting long shadows across the yard. I knelt beside the marigolds and dug in deep. The soil was rich, dark, pliable in my hands. I planted 3 more, just for the color. Sometimes people return, sometimes they don't, but your peace should never depend on their timing. I thought about all the women I've known, neighbors, friends, clients at the library who gave, and then woke up one day feeling like strangers in their own lives. I wish I could gather them all here, pour them tea, show them how the sun spills through lace curtains at 10 a.m. and how quiet does not mean lonely. I would say this: you do not have to wait for someone to see your worth before you honor it. Yourself, you can let the knock come and still not open the door, or open it gently and choose not to let the past walk into far. My life is still quiet, but now it is full of light, and every corner belongs to me. The other half would go to someone they didn't know yet, a young woman I'd met at the community library. Her name was Clara. She was 26, working 3 jobs, and raising her niece after her sister passed. We spoke once when she saw me mending a book cover with old linen thread. I wish I had a grandmother like you, she said softly. Mine passed before I was born. I saw something in her. Something that reminded me of myself at 24, determined, quiet, tired. Over the next few weeks, I got to know her. Slowly, I brought her leftover soup. I helped her patch her coat. I watched her niece once when Clara was called into a last-minute shift. No one in the house knew, and I didn't offer it. That was the gift of silence. It became a wall they didn't realize I'd begun to build. Not to shut them out, but to keep myself safe. Melissa, of course, noticed eventually. You've been distant, she said one evening, leaning against the kitchen island, her voice neutral. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About what?" "About what's mine." She didn't like that. I could see it in the way her mouth tightened. She had grown used to my softness, my availability, to her. My presence had become part of the furniture, useful, silent, and easy to move if needed. But I had stopped being easy. Darren said little. He always had trouble with discomfort. He seemed relieved by my silence. Even as it unsettled him, he kissed my cheek once before leaving for work and said, "Hope you're doing okay, Mum." I smiled and nodded. "Just fine." Inside, I was unraveling years of assumptions, pulling out the threads of service and sacrifice and laying them flat, examining what had really kept me tethered to this life. It wasn't love anymore, not the kind that is mutual, at least. It was a habit, memory, guilt, and that had to change. I stopped babysitting the twins. I said I had other plans. Melissa offered a hesitant smile and hired a sitter. Darren didn't ask. I cleaned out my closet, boxed up old photos. I donated half my wardrobe to the church drive and repainted my room, pale sage, my favorite color. Melissa walked past and raised an eyebrow. "You're really redecorating?" She asked, like it was a crime to refresh a space. I thought it was time. I said it was more than time. In my silence, I heard things I had ignored for years. The way Melissa snapped at the twins when no one was watching. The way Darren's shoulders sagged at the end of each day. The way the house, though larger than it used to be, felt emptier. I was not the only one losing things, but I was the only one doing something about it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting. I was preparing for something I couldn't yet name, a change, a severing, a freedom. I had stopped begging for a place in their story. Now, I am writing a new one. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like breathing again. Once the silence had settled and my intentions had become quiet actions, I began to move differently, not out of anger, but out of necessity. There comes a point when a woman no longer rearranges herself to fit inside other people's expectations. She simply steps out of the frame. I started by reclaiming my mornings. For years, they'd begun with everyone else's needs, toast crusts, vitamin drops, uniforms laid out, Darren's shirts ironed, Melissa's herbal tea steeped just long enough. Now, I woke before the sun, lit one candle, and sat by the kitchen window with a journal and my tea. No noise, no motion, just the sound of sparrows outside and my own pulse, steady and mine. In that little notebook, I began writing things I hadn't said in decades. Not memoirs, not letters, just sentences, thoughts, a memory of Darren's 3rd birthday, a fear I'd carried in my chest when I was 36. A truth I'd never spoken out loud. I sometimes resented how easily people forget mothers. Each word was a release. I began volunteering again, once a week at the community library. Clara was often there. Her niece, Bella, took to me quickly. She'd sit in my lap while I read her stories. Small hands curled around my wrist like a ribbon. Clara called me Miss Margaret at first, but it didn't take long before she began to call me simply Margie. Not Maggie, not a nickname imposed. A name chosen, spoken with care. She reminded me what it felt like to be seen. Melissa didn't ask where I went in the afternoons. Darren assumed I was keeping busy. That suited me fine. In March, I sold my grandmother's jewelry, not out of need, but intention. The money went into Clara's education fund. Quietly, I worked with June to set up a separate account. The terms were clear. The money would be released gradually to cover school fees, housing, and basic expenses. It wasn't a gift wrapped in vows. It was a bridge. The kind I had once built for Darren, stone by stone, without anyone watching. There's a strange peace that comes from directing your love where it is needed, not where it is merely tolerated. Around that time, I began organizing the attic, sorting through old boxes. Tax records, holiday decorations I came across. A storage tub with Melissa's name on it, bridal keepsakes, duplicate kitchen gadgets, unused gifts from their registry, a card still taped to one, addressed to the happy couple. I left the box at their bedroom door. Melissa never acknowledged it, but she saw the message. I cleared space in the attic that week and laid down a rug, moved my sewing machine up there. Reclaimed it as something of my own. I began spending weekends with Evelyn. She was my sister, but more than that, she was the only person left who remembered the version of me that came before all this, before I was Darren's mother. Before I became the background character in someone else's household. We'd sit on her porch, drinking lemonade or gin depending on the hour, and talk about the girls we once were, the dreams we folded into drawers. The moments we wished we'd said no instead of nodding. She told me, I think I like this version of you better, the one who doesn't explain everything. I smiled, so do I. At home, things continued, but differently. Melissa no longer asked for favors, not because she didn't need them, but because she could sense I wasn't offering. Darren stopped updating me about their plans. The tension between us lived beneath the surface, like a splinter neither of us would acknowledge, but I no longer shrank from it. When the sitter called off one Thursday and Melissa asked if I could just this once pick up the tea. Wins from preschool, I looked her in the eye and said, I'm sorry. I have an appointment. She blinked. Can't you reschedule? No, I said, I can't. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need to. The shift was clear. I was no longer an extension of their convenience. The truth is, they hadn't expected me to become anything else. That week, I visited a small real estate office in town. Nothing flashy, just a window with dusty blinds and a handwritten sign in faded ink. Properties. Managed, homes reclaimed. I sat with a woman named Rosa. She had warm eyes and a practical mind. I'm not leaving yet, I told her, but I want to know my options. She nodded. It's smart to plan. Even if it's just for peace of mind, that's all I was after, really. Peace, not a house, not a courtroom battle, just the feeling of knowing that if I needed to move, truly move, I could, that I had legs and savings and choices. Power is quiet like that. Later that month, Clara invited me to dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread and laughter so sincere it didn't need wine to loosen it. Bella sat beside me and told me I was her library grandma. The phrase hit me square in the heart, not because I needed the title, but because it was given freely. No one had coached her to say it. No one had told her I was real family. She just knew that night. I wrote in my journal, I no longer ask for a place. I go where I am welcomed. I began applying that rule to everything. I said no to things I once would have accepted out of obligation. I stopped pretending that shared blood equaled shared respect. I started investing time in people who saw me, not just as a convenience or a caretaker, but as a person with wants, limits, and a name. I updated my trust again with June, this time. I included a final clause, if anything happened to me. The house would be sold, Melissa would receive nothing. Darren would receive a small sum, enough to soften the blow, not enough to inherit control. The rest would go to Clara, to Bella's education, and to a women's shelter in the city I once turned to after Darren's father died. I kept the documents tucked away, not as a threat. Not even as a message, but as a mirror, so I could look at them and say, this is the life I chose, not the one I was reduced to. I moved differently after that. And for the first time in a long time, every step was mine. They didn't notice right away. That's the thing about people who are used to your presence. They don't realize what you held together until it begins to unravel, and by the time they feel the weight of it, you've already stepped away. I watched the small changes first, from a distance, though I was still in the house. She never wore it, but I told myself it wasn't her color. Their wedding was tasteful, chic. I wasn't allowed to help plan it. Melissa's mother handled all of that, but I paid for the florist. Quietly, I used a savings bond my mother had left me when I had never touched. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't expect a thank you. But I remember standing in the back during the rehearsal dinner and wondering when I had stopped being someone they included in sentences like our family and started being a footnote at the bottom of their plans when they struggled with the down payment for their first place. I offered them my house. Temporarily, I said, until they got on their feet. I moved into the spare room, the one Doran had used in high school, and left the master bedroom to them. I cooked dinners. I watched the twins when they came. When Melissa went back to work 3 months postpartum and insisted on full-time help, just until we can get a nanny, she said, I became that nanny, without the title, without the paycheck. I bathed those babies, sing them lullabies. Took them for stroller walks when Melissa had early meetings and Doran worked late. I learned what calmed each of them, how Micah liked the hum of the bathroom fan and Sophie needed her pink blanket under one cheek to fall asleep. I kept charts of their feeding schedules, made organic purees, bought diapers in bulk to help out, even though no one ever asked me to. Melissa once told a friend on the phone that I was helpful. Not loving, not important, just helpful, like a well-designed app. Background support. I told myself it was enough, that being present was love, even if it went unseen. Maybe, in time, she'd come to accept me. That Doran would notice what I did, even if he didn't say it. But over time, things changed. Subtly, they stopped asking if I wanted to come to church. Melissa planned family photos without me. I found myself in fewer of their calendars, fewer conversations. At first, I made excuses for them. They're busy, they're overwhelmed. It's just a phase, but phases aren't supposed to last this long. And absence, when repeated, starts to look a lot like choice. Still, I kept going. I cleaned quietly after dinner. I left folded laundry at their door. I changed the twins' bedsheets and left sticky notes with bedtime reminders when I was gone visiting my sister. I never thought of it as servitude. I thought of it as love. But love, when unacknowledged, begins to erode, not like fire, but like fog, slowly. Until you can't see the road you were on. Until someone says out loud, as Melissa did that April morning, that you are not a real family, and then it all makes sense. Every quiet dismissal, every shift in how they looked at you, every unspoken boundary that made you feel like a shadow in the home you once called yours. I still remember the scarf, still remember watching her drop it at the back of the closet when they returned from their honeymoon. She never even tried it on. That was my first clue. I suppose not that she hated me, but that she'd already decided I was not part of their circle. Not really, and still, I stayed. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We stay until something or someone finally shows us the door, even when they never say the words out loud. I thought I was helping, but all the while, I was teaching them how to forget me. It didn't happen all at once. I didn't wake up one morning and realize they had grown tired of me. It was a slow erosion, like watching wallpaper peel at the corners, each little curl unnoticed until the whole wall looks forgotten. It began with silence, not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that carries questions. I would speak at dinner, offer a story about the twins or a small memory from my day, and Melissa would nod politely while looking at her phone. Doran would chew in silence, sometimes catching my eye with a thin, uneasy smile, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. They stopped asking about my days. I noticed that. When the twins were little, I used to tell them stories about my childhood, how I rode a bicycle with a red basket, how my mother baked peach cobbler every Sunday. Doran used to say my stories made everything feel warm, but somewhere between New promotions and bigger calendars. My voice became background noise. Melissa had a way of making me feel optional, like a seat at the end of the table that could be filled or left empty, depending on the guest list. She changed the living room one day without telling me. Rearranged the furniture while I was at my sister Evelyn's for the weekend. When I returned, my chair, the one I'd had for over 20 years, with the floral fabric worn soft by time, was gone, replaced by a sleek grey recliner she'd ordered online. "Oh, I thought we could use a more modern look," she said. When I asked, "Hope that's okay," the chair was already donated. It wasn't about the chair, it was about what it meant, that pieces of me could be erased without permission. That my presence was no longer part of the home's design. I found it harder to rest after that. Even the kitchen changed. Melissa started labeling the cupboards, organizing everything by color and function. It was efficient, sure, but it made me feel like a visitor in a place I'd once ruled like a queen. My tea mugs were pushed to the highest shelf. The calendar no longer included my appointments. When I mentioned I had a dental checkup, she looked surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize you still went to Dr. Latham," she said. "I assumed you'd stopped. We didn't schedule a car. I walked that day, 3 miles each way in the early heat of July. I used to walk often before they moved in. It helped my knees. Cleared my head. But that day, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like displacement. The hurts came quietly, 100 of them. Darren used to bring me hydrangeas on Mother's Day. Not roses, not tulips, hydrangeas. He remembered they were my favorite. I planted them when he was born. A blue bush right outside his window. He'd press his little nose to the glass and laugh when bees came close. But 2 years in a row, Mother's Day passed without a word. They posted photos online of brunch with Melissa's mother, champagne glasses, laughter. A caption that said, "Celebrating the best mum in the world." I didn't cry, not then. But I clipped the last bloom from the hydrangea bush and left it in a water glass on my dresser. I watched it wilt over days, petal by petal, and felt something inside me do the same. The twins began calling me Maggie, not Grandma. Melissa insisted it was modern, more casual. "We don't really do those old titles," she said. "It's better this way, less confusing for the kids." But I wasn't confused. I was erased. There were moments that lingered, subtle. Shifts in the air that told me I didn't belong the way I used to. Like the time Melissa hosted a book club. I baked lemon shortbread, the kind her friend Lisa once complimented. I placed them on a tray with fresh mint, folded napkins, and left them on the counter before stepping out for my walk. When I returned, they were gone. The tray was in the dishwasher. Not a word of thanks. The store-bought biscotti were on the table instead. Little things. Forgettable, maybe. But when stacked together, they form a monument to the feeling of not being needed. Not truly. Darren's birthday was especially hard. I bought him a leather-bound journal with his initials, D.E., pressed in gold on the cover. I remembered. He used to love writing in college. He once told me it helped him think clearer. I wrapped it myself. Wrote a card with a memory from when he was 6, when he'd used crayons to draw Best Mum on a cereal box and taped it to the fridge. I left it on his desk the morning of his birthday, that night. At dinner, they toasted with wine, passed out gifts. Mine was never opened. It sat at the end of the table like an orphan. No one mentioned it, not even him. I told myself he didn't notice, but he had to have seen it. The gold shimmered under the lamplight, and then there were the family outings. At first, they included me, subtly, a picnic here, a museum visit there. But it shifted, quietly. Melissa started saying things like, "It's just for the kids today," or "We'll only be a short while," or "It might be too tiring for you." They started leaving without telling me. I'd hear the door close and find the house empty. Shoes gone, diaper bag taken, laughter echoing down the driveway. I'd sit on the porch, pretending to knit, and listen for the engine returning. Like a dog waiting at the gate. Once, when they came home, Mike asked, "Why didn't Maggie come?" Melissa responded before I could. She had other things to do. But I didn't. That hurt, really, not the exclusion. But the way it was brushed off, as though my absence didn't matter, as though I had no longing to be there, I started to drift after that, stopped baking, stopped decorating for the seasons. Stopped leaving the little notes I used to tuck into the twins' lunchboxes when I packed them. Hearts, riddles, tiny affirmations scribbled in my careful cursive. No one noticed they were gone. Melissa started snapping more, not just at me, but at the twins. Her voice tightened in the mornings when the lunches weren't packed, when the socks didn't match. When the sitter arrived 5 minutes late, Darren came home later than usual. The lines in his forehead deeper, the sighs longer. He looked at the kitchen like a stranger, the sink full, the counter cluttered, the refrigerator bare. I didn't leave dirty dishes. I simply stopped washing theirs. I kept my own meals light and clean, cleaned what I used, and went upstairs to my room. My door became a boundary. The kind they didn't dare knock on anymore. It wasn't malice. I didn't glare, I didn't slam doors, I wasn't cruel. I was simply absent from their routines, their comforts, their chaos. They had counted on me as part of the invisible machinery of the house, always there. Always running in the background, smoothing out the friction before it became fire. And when that was gone, they felt it. The twins asked first, "Why doesn't Maggie come with us to the library anymore?" Sophie asked one Saturday, her backpack clutched to her chest. "We go with Miss Karen now," Micah added, "but she doesn't know which books we like." Melissa gave a strained smile. "Maggie's busy these days." I didn't correct her. Busy, yes, but not in the way they meant. I was simply investing elsewhere now. I brought Clara grocery bags. When her car broke down, I attended a storytelling workshop at the library. I even joined a quilting circle at the community center. Though I never sewed a thing, I just listened, laughed, and remembered what it felt like to be with women who had no demands on me. Only presence at home, the silence I had once used. As a shield began to echo back at them, I saw it one Thursday evening. Melissa burned the rice. The chicken was undercooked, the twins were fussy, and Darren's face was tired. They sat down at the table, 3 plates half prepared, and for the first time in years. No one looked toward me for the fix. I was upstairs, replanting succulents in shallow ceramic pots I'd found at the flea market. When I came down to make tea, the kitchen was a mess. Melissa glanced at me, and something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not even guilt. Just realization. She had never seen herself in this role. The caretaker of her own household. She'd grown used to outsourcing it, and I had let her, for too long. A few days later, Darren asked me if I could pick up the twins from school. Just this once, I said. I already have plans. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a new truth. I had a life outside of them now, one with appointments and friends. And meaning they weren't part of. They started forgetting things. Permission slips, grocery staples, birthdays. Melissa forgot her mother's anniversary dinner and blamed it on her calendar not syncing. Darren forgot to RSVP for Sophie's school recital. And they ended up without proper seats. I used to be the safety net, the reminder, the invisible calendar and cushion. Now, I was simply the woman upstairs. It wasn't that I wanted them to suffer. I just needed them to feel the absence of what they had taken for granted, and they did. Evelyn told me once, "You don't have to punish people. Life does the teaching for you." She was right. One morning, Melissa knocked gently on my door. I opened it, still in my robe, tea in hand. She looked tired. Her tone was careful. "I was wondering if you'd be open to helping out with the twins again. Just sometimes they miss you." I nodded slowly. I miss them too, but… She asked, waiting for the edge I didn't offer. No, but I said, just I'm being more careful with my time now. She looked away, and for the first time. I sensed something soft under the armor, not affection, not apology, but maybe respect, not enough to heal what was broken, but enough to stop twisting the knife. Darren was quieter. He didn't ask questions, not directly. But I caught him watching me sometimes as I watered the plants, as I locked the mailbox, as I carried a small bag out to the car. Once he said, "You seem different lately, happier." I said, "I am," and I was, not because I was vindicated, but because I had finally stopped performing for their comfort. They began talking about moving. I overheard Melissa on the phone. "This place doesn't feel like ours anymore," she said. I smiled at that, not out of spite, but because it was true. It never had been. They were guests who had mistaken the kindness of a host for a permanent invitation. They started looking at new neighborhoods, better schools, shorter commutes, fresher starts. I offered no opinion. I didn't ask about their viewings. They would leave eventually. That much was clear, but I would remain. The walls were mine. The garden was mine. The past was mine. And now, finally, so was the future. One afternoon, Micah ran into my room unannounced, clutching a crumpled drawing. "It's you," he said proudly. "And Bella and the library tree." I blinked. "Bella?" He nodded. "You told me about her. I wanted to draw you both." It stunned me, how much he remembered, how much he understood. He wasn't losing me. He was seeing the version of me that had finally come back to life. They lost something when I pulled away. Not just a helper, not just a sitter or a cook or a quiet witness to their curated lives. They lost the root of the home they thought they owned. And now that root had planted itself elsewhere, deeper, freer, and no longer willing to be cut, I wrote the letter on a rainy afternoon in April. The kind of day that pulls you inward whether you like it or not. The house was quiet, the twins away for the weekend with Melissa's mother, and Darren at some off-site work retreat. The clock ticked louder than usual, and the sound of rain on the window reminded me of a hospital room 30 years earlier, where I first held Darren against my chest and whispered promises I couldn't yet imagine breaking. It wasn't a letter meant to be sent. It was one of those letters you write only once, not for reconciliation, not for justice, but because the weight of unsaid things becomes too heavy to carry forward. I addressed it to him. "To Darren, my dear boy," I wrote, though the word boy caught in my throat as soon as I penned it. He hadn't been a boy in a long time, and maybe, if I was being honest, he'd been trained to stop being a son long before he stopped needing me. I don't write this to accuse you. I write it to remember myself. That's how it began. From there, the words flowed slowly, measured like breaths. I told him about the morning I found his baby sock still warm on the radiator after his father's funeral, about the time I walked 5 miles in a snowstorm to pick up a book he wanted from the library because it was the only one that helped him fall asleep, about the birthday party when only one friend showed up, and I made that boy feel like royalty just to keep the sadness from Darren's face. I told him I never wanted thanks. But I never thought I'd become forgettable either. "I don't believe you meant to hurt me," I wrote. "But I think you were taught to believe that I'd always be there, no matter what you asked, or didn't ask, or assumed. You stopped seeing me, because you didn't have to. It wasn't bitter. It was honest." I told him about the moment I knew he was gone, not when he moved out, or when he married, or even when he signed my name without asking. It was the day Melissa called me not real family. "I want you to understand something," I wrote. "It wasn't what she said. It was that you said nothing. That was the real wound. That in the face of my erasure, he stayed seated. That my name, became ink on a line without breath behind it." I told him I forgave him, not because I was noble, but because I needed the room to grow elsewhere. I've found people who see me. I wrote, they don't know everything I've done, but they see who I am now and they value that woman. I hope someday you remember her too. I folded the letter gently, placed it in a linen envelope, and slid it into the drawer beside my bed. I didn't need him to read it, I just needed to write it. Later that week, I burned the envelope in the garden. Just a match, a ceramic bowl, and a steady hand. The flame curled the edges slowly. And I watched as my own words disappeared into smoke, not in anger, but in release. It felt like closing a door without slamming it. That same evening, I went through the last of the old photo albums. I'd kept them out of sentiment, but they no longer held the same glow. Faces that once brought warmth now carried questions. I didn't want to keep asking, so I chose a few, just a handful, and slipped them into a small box marked Keep. One was of Doran at age 4, sitting on my lap with a popsicle and sticky hands. One was of my mother in the kitchen, apron stained with jam, her eyes knowing and stern, and one was of me, younger, stronger, standing beside a garden bed I had built by hand. My sleeves rolled up and dirt under my nails. That was the woman I wanted to remember. I gave the rest to Evelyn. She had a better memory for dates and details. When Evelyn called one evening and asked how I was, I found I couldn't answer. I just looked around at the room, a home filled with framed memories I wasn't in, and said, I'm fine. Because what else do you say when 100 quiet hurts live in your bones? You forget which one broke you first. You just carry them all like stones in your pocket, pretending the weight is manageable, until one day it isn't. It was the signature that did it, not the missing chair, not the forgotten birthdays, not even the way Melissa had begun referring to me in the past tense when speaking to her friends. She was always really involved with the twins. Back then, no, it was that single, inked curve of my name on a legal document I had never seen, authorizing a decision I would have never made. They had used my name to approve the refinancing of the house, my house. The one I had paid off long before Melissa came into our lives, before the twins were born, before Doran had even learned to shave. I found out by accident. That's the cruel thing about betrayal. It rarely announces itself. It hides in the folds of paperwork, in half-truths and fine print. It was late September, and I had gone to the credit union to open a savings account. For Sophie and Micah, I'd been putting aside a little each month, nothing grand, just bits from my pension, small earnings from mending dresses and hemming slacks for neighbours. I thought it would be a quiet gift someday, something they could open when they turned 18, a seed of love, planted in silence. The woman at the counter, a kind-faced clerk with silver glasses, hesitated as she typed, Mrs. Elwood. She said gently, it shows here that there was a lien added to your property 6 weeks ago. Are you aware of that? I blinked. No, I said, that can't be right. But it was. A second mortgage had been taken out in Darren's name, and mine. I remember the numbness that washed over me like cold dishwater. I walked home that day without remembering the steps. My legs moved out of habit. The sun was too bright. The mail sat untouched in the box. I closed the front door behind me and leaned against it, the house suddenly foreign, a place where my name could be borrowed like a dish towel. That evening, I waited until the kids were asleep. Melissa was upstairs on her laptop, Darren in the living room half watching a game. I asked him quietly, did you refinance the house? He looked up, startled, then guilty. Yeah, a while ago, he said. It was just to consolidate some things. The rates were good. We didn't think it was a big deal, I asked. He paused. Melissa and I tried to keep my voice steady. You signed my name. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the television, suddenly muted. You weren't around that week, he finally said, and it was time sensitive. Melissa thought it would be fine. You would have agreed. Anyway, there it was, you would have agreed. That sentence unraveled everything, all the years I spent sacrificing, all the decisions I made carefully, thoughtfully, with his future in mind. And now my agreement, my consent, was a foregone conclusion, not even worth the trouble of asking. My identity, my rights, reduced to an assumption. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I simply said, "That was wrong." Darren stood up then, as if to defend himself, but no defense came. Just a tired shrug. "I'm sorry," he said. "We were just trying to manage everything Melissa thought." I don't care what Melissa thought. I said, quiet, clear. That was the first time I'd ever said something like that aloud. I felt it ring through me like a small chime, delicate, but unshakable. He nodded slowly, embarrassed, not ashamed, embarrassed, because now it was out in the open, later that night. I found the documents in the drawer Melissa kept locked. The one she thought I didn't notice, it wasn't even well hidden. She had photocopied my signature from an old file, then traced it onto the mortgage form. Sloppy, arrogant, as if I didn't matter enough to do it well. I sat in my room for a long time after that. The walls felt thinner, like they'd stopped trying to hold in the warmth. I looked around at the remnants of my life, the crocheted afghan over the chair, the photos on the dresser. The porcelain jewelry box Darren had made me in second grade, and I realized something I hadn't wanted to believe. This was no longer my home. They hadn't just taken advantage, they had rewritten the terms of my presence. I wasn't a matriarch, I was a placeholder, a signature, a convenience. The betrayal ran deeper than the ink. It was about how little they believed I would resist, how thoroughly they trusted my silence, and they weren't wrong. I had taught them that silence, I had practiced it like a second language, quiet sacrifice, invisible care, swallowed offense. I had allowed their comfort to come at the cost of my boundaries. I had made my love too easy to borrow, too simple to erase. But something changed that night. I remember sitting by the window, the moon high and silver, and thinking about my mother. She would have never allowed this. She once walked out of a neighbor's bridge at night because someone insulted her pie crust. We don't let people cut into us like we're already theirs, she used to say, even family, especially family. That week, I went to the county clerk's office and requested a certified copy of the title. I asked about legal options. I called a lawyer Evelyn recommended, a woman named June with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. We spoke for an hour. She listened more than she spoke. Then she said, "You have more power than you think." I didn't tell Darren or Melissa. I didn't mention the lawyer. I just began to gather paperwork, records, savings. The little nest I'd built for Sophie and Micah, I moved it elsewhere. I set up a trust in my name, a new one with no mention of Melissa, no mention of Darren, either, not yet, not until I understood what I was protecting them from. Mostly, I protected myself. I stopped folding their laundry, I stopped cooking dinner, I started going for walks longer and farther than before. I began to meet with June weekly. We talked about options, we talked about ownership. We talked about what it means to reclaim your name after someone signs it without asking. Melissa noticed, eventually. "You've been quiet lately," she said over breakfast one morning, stirring her coffee without looking at me. "I've just been thinking," I said, "about what belongs to me." She paused. Just for a second, then smiled like it didn't matter, but it did, because a line had been crossed, and now I was drawing one of my own, after the forged signature. I stopped talking. Not in the dramatic way one might imagine, not with slammed doors or tearful accusations, but in the quiet, deliberate way that women of my generation know how to wield. Silence became my shelter. My protest, my reply. I didn't need to announce it. Silence, when done well, doesn't need explanation. It grows slowly, like ivy, until it covers the old cracks and climbs straight over the doors you once stood at, knocking politely. It began with meals. I no longer asked if they'd be home for dinner. I stopped fussing over menus and favourites. Melissa had always liked lemon chicken. Darren preferred meatloaf. I used to accommodate both, juggling pots like a hotel chef. Now I made oatmeal for myself, or a boiled egg. Whatever was quiet, cheap, and didn't fill the house with scent, I left the dishes to them. If they asked why I wasn't eating with them, I simply said I wasn't hungry and returned to my book. The twins noticed. Children always do. Sophie came to me one afternoon and asked, "Maggie, why don't you play trains with us anymore?" I smiled, brushed her cheek, "Because I'm building something different now. Sweetheart." She didn't understand, but someday she might, in silence. I began to reclaim the things that had once made me feel whole. I walked farther, not just to the store or the park, but to the old stone chapel near the edge of town. It had a courtyard filled with lavender and an iron bench that faced the hills. I brought a thermos of tea and a notebook. Sometimes I write. Sometimes I just listen to the wind move through the leaves. I started keeping receipts, saving every document I came across, bills with my name on them, old tax records. Photographs of the original title deed, not because I planned to make a scene, but because I needed a mirror, proof of who I was, of what I'd built. June, my lawyer, met with me weekly now. We sat in her modest office with framed diplomas and a potted ficus wilting slightly in the sun. She wore sensible cardigans and asked thoughtful questions. Not once did she make me feel like an old woman acting out of spite. "You're not wrong to feel this way," she told me once. "But be careful. Revenge is loud. Integrity is quiet. You're choosing the latter." And I was. That month I made small, invisible shifts. I opened a new account in my name only. I moved what little inheritance I still had, a final bond from my father, untouched for decades, into that account. I reviewed my will. I changed the executor. Quietly, carefully, I kept the old copy in the fireproof box. The new one I stored at June's office. I removed Darren and Melissa as primary beneficiaries of my estate, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. The house, if anything happened to me, would now be split in a different way, one half to a foundation for single mothers, a small organization I'd volunteered with in my 50s. I told her to keep what she liked and let go of the rest. I was clearing space, not just in the attic, but in my heart. Clara noticed something different in me around that time. She said it during a Sunday visit, after Bella had fallen asleep in my lap during a story. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled. I think I stopped carrying things that didn't belong to me. She didn't press. She never did. That's what I valued most in her presence. No explanations required, just recognition. The letter I never sent taught me something. That I didn't need permission to reclaim myself. That I didn't need an apology to be whole. That closure isn't a gift someone else gives you. It's a doorway you build from your own pain and walk through when you're ready. I sat in my garden for a long time that week, watching the azaleas come in. They bloomed late that year, but stronger than I remembered, thick blossoms in soft pink and white. Like a quiet celebration, I used to plant things hoping others would admire them. Now I planted for the joy of seeing them rise. That's what the letter gave me. Not a new ending, but a beginning with no one else's shadow over it. A story that didn't need to be passed down, just lived well. I wake up before the sun most days. The house, now just mine again, rests in silence, not the kind that aches, but the kind that comforts, the kind that fills a room with stillness you can lean into. There's no rush, no door slamming, no footsteps overhead, just the soft creak of the floorboards as I move through my morning. The kettle sings when it's ready. I've started using loose leaf tea again, something I gave up years ago. BECAUSE Melissa preferred the convenience of bags. Now I sit at the table with my porcelain cup, the one with a faint crack running through the saucer. I find that I love it more for its imperfection. There are no voices calling my name, no errands waiting with expectation. What I have now is space, and in that space, a gentle kind of freedom. They moved out 6 weeks ago. It happened without ceremony. One afternoon, while I was pruning the hydrangeas, Melissa came out onto the porch, her face tight but not cruel. She said they'd found a place across town, closer to the new school, less driving, she explained. Darren stood behind her, holding Micah's toy bean. He didn't look at me, just past me, as if he wasn't sure what could be said. I nodded. I hope it's a good fit. Melissa hesitated. We'll come back for the rest next weekend. They didn't. The next time I passed the twins' room, it was empty but for a stray sock under the dresser and a crayon drawing still taped to the wall. I left it there, not as a shrine, just a memory, one that didn't ask for anything in return. At first, the quiet startled me. I found myself expecting the thump of school shoes, the sound of Darren's car in the drive, the rustle of Melissa's shopping bags, but it passed like a storm pulling out to sea, and what was left behind was clarity. I've filled my days with small rituals now. I walk the garden path every morning, checking the lavender, coaxing the tomatoes, brushing the dew from the petals of the lilies. I keep a journal by the windowsill and write only what I see: a bee tangled in the hollyhocks, a neighbor boy chasing a paper kite. The way morning light slips between the slats of the fence like it's trying to stay hidden, I see Clara twice a week. We meet at the cafe near the library, the one with chipped mugs and a piano no one plays. Bella runs to greet me with a grin that still knocks the breath out of me. You smell like sunshine, she told me once, hugging my waist. Children don't pretend. That's what I love most about them. They see what's there, no filters, no expectations. I never told Clara about the trust, not directly. She'll find out when the time comes. Until then, she knows only that someone believes in her. Sometimes that's enough. Evelyn visits on Sundays. We sit on the porch and listen to old songs on the radio, humming along to lyrics we no longer fully remember. She brings strawberry jam in mason jars, and I make tea with lemon and honey. We speak less now, but everything we say feels like it. Matters more. I've begun sleeping better. No more late-night footsteps, no more worries about tiptoeing through my own house. I fall asleep to the sound of wind in the trees and wake with the light warming my face. I didn't. No peace could be this full or this quiet. The mail still comes, and sometimes there's a card, a generic birthday greeting from Doran, signed in Melissa's hand. I don't return them. I keep them in a drawer, not from sentiment, but as a reminder of what once was. And what I've chosen now. The legal papers are sealed. The house is in my name, with terms that protect the life I've built. The trust is active, the will final. I no longer fear being erased. There are no family photos in the hallway anymore. Instead, I've hung paintings from local artists, soft landscapes, still lifes, watercolors with loose brush strokes, things that breathe without needing to explain themselves. I no longer bake out of obligation, but once in a while, I'll make an apple tart, just for the smell it brings. I'll eat a slice in the late afternoon, barefoot in the kitchen, listening to the ticking clock. It's in these small moments that I feel most alive. I don't miss the chaos, I don't miss the noise, and strangely, I don't feel bitterness either, only distance. Like a chapter that has closed cleanly, without ink bleeding through to the next. Sometimes people pass my garden and wave. They know me now not as someone's mother or someone's helper, but as Margaret, the woman with the sage green shutters and the quiet smile. I like that. I've started writing letters again, not to anyone in particular, just to the girl I once was. I tell her she did more than enough, that she carried love like water in cupped hands, that she made beauty from nothing, over and over, again, and now she can rest. My life is quiet now. There is no applause, no audience, just the sound of wind through the trees, the weight of a book in my lap, and the deep, steady knowing that I have finally come home to myself. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. It was a Saturday in late May when the knock came, not hurried, not timid, just steady, the kind of knock that expects to be answered. I was in the garden, gloved hands deep, in soil, coaxing new life out of the beds I'd planted by the fence. The marigolds were coming in this year, a bit late, but bold and unapologetic. I stood, brushed the dirt from my palms, and made my way inside. When I opened the door, Darren was standing there. He looked older than I remembered, though it hadn't been that long. His shirt was wrinkled at the collar, eyes tired in that hollow, behind-the-bone sort of way. He held nothing in his hands. No flowers, no letter, no token of regret, just himself. That was either everything or nothing. I hadn't yet decided. Hi, Mum, that word, so simple, so familiar, hung in the air for a long moment. I didn't respond right away. I just opened the door wider. He stepped in cautiously, as if the house might reject him. I led him to the kitchen, set the kettle on without asking. Some habits never leave you, even after your heart has relearned how to stop performing. He sat at the table like a guest, glancing at the new curtains, the framed print of a lighthouse I'd hung where the family photo used to be. This looks different, he said. It is. I poured the tea, slid his cup across the table, and sat down. The air between us was filled with all the things we'd never said. It hummed, almost gently. I didn't come to ask for anything, he began. Melissa doesn't know I'm here. I didn't reply. I let him carry the silence. I've been thinking a lot, he said, since we moved out. He sipped the tea, held it in his mouth longer than necessary, like he was searching for the right words behind the warmth. I didn't see it then, what we asked of you, what we took without ever thinking to give. His voice cracked slightly, not dramatic, just honest. When Melissa said you weren't real family, I should have said something. I know that now. I knew it then too. I just didn't know how to make space between you and her without breaking something. You chose not to break it, I said softly. On a warm Sunday in late April, I opened the door to my own home and realized I didn't belong there anymore. My key still turned in the lock, yes. The walls still carried the scent of rosewood polish I used every spring. And the hydrangeas I planted in 1998 bloomed out front like always. But the sound of my daughter-in-law's voice from the kitchen, cool, clipped, and sharp enough to flake glass, made something shift inside me that I couldn't undo. She was on the phone. She didn't know I'd come in yet. I stood in the hall, quietly setting down the groceries I had just bought for the house, the yogurt she liked, the organic juice for the twins. Even the cedar blocks for the linen drawers she never remembered to replace. I had always done those things, the little ones, the invisible ones. My son, Darren, used to call them my touches of magic, but she said it plainly, like flicking off a light. No. She's not real family, she's just here. There was a pause on her end. I imagined someone asked what she meant. She's his mother. Yes, she replied. But she's not ours, not part of our future, not really. She's just from before. I didn't make a sound. I stepped back, quietly, and walked out the front door without picking up the bags. I sat in the garden for a long while, pretending to prune the daffodils, until she left for her Pilates class and the house fell quiet again. My name is Margaret Elwood. I'm 71, and that was the moment I knew they'd let me go. Not with a scream, not with a cruel eviction, but with a sentence I was never supposed to hear. Subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The strange thing about betrayal is that it never feels like a single storm. It's not thunder or collapse. It's moss. It grows in the silence. It wraps around the corners of the house you built and makes a home for itself there. I raised my son alone. His father passed when Doran was just 9, a sudden heart attack while returning from a fishing trip he'd insisted on taking even with the flu. I remember the call, the numbing weight of it. I remember sitting at the kitchen table while Doran finished his homework, not yet knowing. He was so small then, his elbows barely reached the wood. I did what mothers do. I tightened the belt. I took on double shifts at the dental office. I learned how to fix the toilet when it was clogged, how to make a cheap meal stretch, how to smile when my shoes had holes and he needed cleats. When Doran got into university, I cried for 3 days, not because I was sad, but because I had saved exactly enough. No loans, just lists and grocery coupons and refusing new coats. He was always a gentle boy, thoughtful. He sent me a Mother's Day card every year, even when he was abroad. He called every Sunday. Until marriage, of course, and even then, it was fine. For a while, Melissa wasn't cruel, just cold in that subtle, bone-deep way women can be when they've already drawn their boundaries. I knew I wasn't her kind of woman. I didn't speak the right way, didn't have the right friends, didn't come from the sort of mother she'd have preferred in her husband's life, but I was kind and consistent and careful never to interfere. They moved in with me when they were between homes. It was supposed to be 6 months. That was 3 years ago. I never asked them to leave. I adapted, the way old trees do, bending quietly when younger limbs need light. I thought that was love, and maybe it was, but love is not always a protection. Sometimes it's just the illusion that you're safe. That day in April, I watched her walk out with her gym bag and her high ponytail swinging, and I realized she had erased me already. Not with cruelty, but with quiet decisions, with invitations I never received, with her habit of reintroducing me at parties as Darren's mom, never my mother-in-law. She'd corrected someone once when they called me Grandma. No. She had laughed lightly. The twins call her Maggie, not Grandma. We don't really do titles like that. I nodded and smiled that day. I always smiled. My father used to say you could outlive anything if you smiled long enough. I stayed silent for a week after the comment on the phone. I watched closely, collecting moments like pebbles in a jar. Each time she left me out of dinner plans, each time she paused before introducing me, each time she didn't notice I'd folded her laundry. They weren't accidents, they were choices. But what stung more than her words was Darren's silence. I thought maybe he hadn't noticed, but he did. He just didn't want to break the peace. He became quieter too, more absent in his own home. Like a man walking through fog and pretending it was sunshine. I don't believe he meant to hurt me. I believe he thought he was protecting everyone. But when you protect everyone by asking your mother to accept less, what you're really doing is shrinking her into a ghost in the house she made. A week after that Sunday, I found the courage to look through the kitchen drawer Melissa called her important papers zone. She often left it open when distracted. That day, she'd left in a rush to meet a friend. The twins were with Doran at the park, and something in me said, now. At the very top was a folder labeled in crisp calligraphy, Family Trust. Inside it, clipped to a lawyer's letterhead, was a breakdown of the future. Everything Doran and Melissa owned, every plan. Every what if. It listed me, once, as a temporary resident with no legal claim. And at the bottom, in the event of Darren's incapacitation or death, primary rights and decisions belong solely to Melissa Jane Holloway Elwood. It wasn't about the house or the trust or the paperwork. It was about the fact that I had disappeared from the story of the family I built legally, emotionally, spiritually, And no one had told me. Not until Melissa's voice on the phone gave it away. I didn't confront them, not yet. But something inside me began to shift that evening. The kind of shift that comes not from rage, but from realization you can only live as a guest in your own life for so long. Eventually, you remember the deed has your name on it, even if no one reads it anymore, and one day you start writing your own name again, not in protest, just to remember what it looks like. The first time I ever held Darren, he was purple and squalling, and I had no idea what to do with him except cry too. I was 24, widowed by 33, and by the time he turned 10. I had already given up most of what the world told me I should want. I didn't mind. I never did. We lived in a one-bedroom flat above a bakery in Peachtree Corners. It smelled of sugar and yeast in the morning, and grease and mop water by night. The stairs creaked so loudly you could hear each visitor coming like a character in a play, but it was ours. I painted the walls soft green and yellow. Darren slept. In the bedroom, I made a bed for myself in the living room with a sofa that unfolded like a tired flower. I got good at folding it fast before he came home, so he'd never have to think of it as my bed, just a sofa. I worked reception at a dental clinic Monday to Saturday. I wore the same 3 pairs of slacks for nearly 7 years. My closet had one coat, a navy wool blend I found secondhand in a church charity bin, and 2 blouses I kept pressed with care when Darren's school needed volunteers for the fall carnival. I took unpaid time off. I sewed costumes. I baked muffins. I knew all his friends' birthdays and sent cards with little riddles inside, signed from Darren's mum, the Riddle Queen. I didn't date, not seriously. There were a few kind men. But I didn't have the bandwidth to build another world when I was still keeping this one stitched together by hand. When Darren was 12, he asked why I never bought myself anything. "You're always saving," he said, frowning at my shoes, which I'd repaired with clear tape. I told him, "Saving is another kind of spending. It's just for later." He nodded, too young to understand, but old enough to remember, and I think he did. For a while, high school was tough. He was brilliant, mathematics, literature, even public speaking, but we couldn't afford much. He wanted to go to debate camp one summer. So I took on evening janitorial work at a church across town. It left me so tired my hands shook. While making breakfast, but I made his scrambled eggs just the same. The year he applied to college, I sold my grandmother's locket, the one with the tiny photo of her in sepia, to help pay for his admissions fees. He got in Georgia Tech, full scholarship. I still remember the envelope, thick, with a seal embossed. I cooked him a steak that night, though it nearly wiped my grocery money for the week. I wrapped it in bacon and served it with mashed sweet potatoes and green beans, and I swear I never felt richer than I did watching him eat that plate clean. After that, I lived mostly through his letters. He mailed sometimes, too. I learned how to use the library computers and sat next to teenagers who clicked their gum and wore headphones like lifelines. But I figured it out. He'd send photos of dorm rooms and study sessions, and once, a blurry picture of a girl named Melissa. She had high cheekbones and shiny hair. She looked like someone from a different kind of magazine than the ones I'd ever read. They got serious quickly. By his junior year, he was talking about rings. I asked if she was kind. He said she was driven. "She's going places, Mum," he told me. "She's already got a consulting offer lined up in DC. I sent her a scarf that Christmas. Hand wear upon, soft grey,